everyone, it's me, John Lorden. Welcome to another episode of Brain Scratch Case Cracked. Today we're going to be looking into the case of Susan Schwarz, and as you can see, judging by the picture, we're going to be jumping in the time machine for this one. We're going back to 1979, and we are talking about a place called Alderwood Manor in Washington. It's a community that is now the cities of Linwood, Briar, and Mountain Lake Terrace. It's approximately 15 miles north of Seattle in Snohomish County. And Susan Schwarz was an attractive young woman in her mid-20s. On Monday, October 22nd, unfortunately, Susan was shot and strangled in her home. Her brother Gary remembers driving by his sister's Alderwood Manor home that day. He saw a couple cars in the driveway. He didn't know that they belonged to homicide detectives. And the next day, his father came to his house with the horrible news about the fact that Susan was dead. Police initially thought that she may have been attacked during a burglary. There was some items that were actually taken from the house. Of course, they questioned people, they chased down all the leads they could, but they just couldn't solve the case. And Susan's case remained unsolved for 32 years. Now, fast forward to the early 2000s, and there is a new investigation strategy that has been floating around the country. Two Snohomish County detectives, Jim Scharf and Dave Heitzman, decided to employ that strategy as well. And this are the cold case playing cards. And if you're not familiar with them, they're basically like a regular set of cards, but they will feature pictures of people that are missing or deceased, and basically they're kind of asking for information. These cards are handed out to inmates. So, of course, they can feature 52 cases per deck. These particular decks were paid for under a grant from the Still-Agwamish tribe of Indians, and they were released in 2008 in hopes of generating new leads for these unsolved homicides and missing persons cases dating all the way back to the 1970s. And Susan Schwarz herself was actually featured as the Queen of Hearts. They distributed more than 3,000 of these decks in the state's prisons and jails. The cards paid off in March of 2010 when Jim Scharf and his new partner, Patrick Vanderweist, received a tip. An inmate saw the card featuring information about Susan Schwarz's slaying. He told detectives Gregory Johnson had admitted to killing her. So here we have one of those jailhouse confessions. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of them, but as we'll see in this case, it seems like this one helped break this case. Scharf and Vanderweist dug into Johnson's life. Inside the case file, they found the name of his then girlfriend. Apparently, she had never been questioned about the murder, which is amazing to me. They thought she might be able to fill in some blanks. Maybe Johnson even talked to her about his involvement in this. So the detectives showed up at the woman's door. They didn't know that she would actually provide critical evidence to put him away. She actually witnessed the killing. The woman, now in her 50s and whose identity has been protected by both the courts and the media, which I'm really thankful for, she was very young at the time, and she had been abused by Gregory Johnson for years. He specifically threatened to kill her if she ever said anything, and he even reaffirmed this threat years later, calling the home of her mother while she was there to remind her. Despite all that, the woman did find the courage, and the words eventually tumbled out. She had been in the small home in 1979 when Gregory Johnson grabbed a pretty young woman out of her shower, tied her up, and put a bullet in her head. Johnson, then 26, looked to find his teenage girlfriend in the room. He shot the victim again and said, "It's that easy. This is what happens to people who F with my life," with the gun still gripped in his hand. Cold case detectives arrested Johnson in April of 2011 outside of his Seattle apartment. He had recently spent long stretches in prison. He was locked up from 1985 to 2000 for robbery. A few months after that, he was released. He was sent back to prison for 6 years for a drugs charge. So why did he do it? What was his motive for killing this woman? Well, Susan Schwarz was a high school friend of Johnson's estranged wife. The woman had confided in Schwarz that her husband beat her. Schwarz helped her friend move into a shelter until the woman could leave the state with the couple's young son. The woman later returned to Washington and spent time with Schwarz in the weeks before her murder. I'm assuming at that point maybe he started following his ex-wife, or he had figured out where she was and put two and two together and figured that Susan Schwarz had helped her escape. The Seattle ex-con 58 pleaded guilty in January of 2012 to second-degree murder, finally admitting that he was responsible for the slaying. A Snohomish judge sentenced Johnson to a minimum of 24 years in prison for the death of Susan. And this was the first conviction in the cases featured on the Snohomish cold case playing cards. Now, it might be the first conviction of all the playing cards, but I'm not really sure. I did some research into these playing cards, and they kind of popped up all around the country in the early 2000s. Some of the articles I read on this case actually credit these two detectives with creating the playing cards, but I saw examples where they were being used in other states prior to this, so I don't think that that is necessarily true. But in any case, playing cards helped crack this case. And I just wanted to give a thank you to HeraldNet and Newsblaze for information on this case. I'm going to include the links down below, so if you want to read more about this case, you can on those sources. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Brain Scratch Case Cracked. Thank you for spending a little of your day with me. I'll catch you on the next show on the Lord and Arch channel. Take care.